So, ceramics of the world. This is an introduction to pottery. I chose Asia, like Near East, Far East, and Africa. And those are the three that I'm having shown in this short presentation. Mesoamerica, Mexico, South America, Eurasia, Europe, not included. So there's a lot of stuff not included here. So we're going to start in the Far East with East Asia because the earliest pottery for man, and I don't want you to just say for Chinese people or Asian people, I'm saying for Stone Age man. So I want you to just think of men, people in general. The earliest pottery was discovered in China's Hunan province recently, and it's almost 20,000 years old. And it was made during the Paleolithic Age, the Stone Age. So this was a time when there was no written record or anything like that. This was certainly very, very early on in human civilization. Okay, so here below is a shard of the ceramic material found inside of the cave. So if you look at this piece, you'll notice that even though it is a very, very early piece of pottery, that this person has decorated the piece. They have used a stick or a tool to create these little decorative lines of holes. If you look closely, there is a kind of scratched in texture. Whether that was used as a decorative thing or for utilitarian purposes, just so that you could kind of get a grip on the pottery, they textured it. We do not know, but certainly it was more than what was just necessary. This is also a piece of earthenware, meaning the people of this time didn't have the technology to fire the clay. The thing about earthenware is that it will only hold water temporarily. Eventually the water will leach out of the pores of the earthenware pottery. Because it's not fired at a super high heat, the clay has not turned super hard and glassy. That's called vitrification, and vitrification has not happened completely in earthenware clay because it's fired usually kind of in like a pit fire, and it's not in a fully enclosed kiln. Clay has in general smaller particles. It is moist, and it is it's kind of like earth that has coalesced far below the ground, and it's usually near some water. It could be at the bottom of a lake, or it could be a place where there used to be a lake. So it has to be mined. It's also very, very dense. It's also very creamy in texture. So clay is very different from just topsoil, let's just say. So I know some of you have had class with Mr. Marchetti. You already know this, and some of these terms are going to become very familiar with you. The pottery wheel is invented in China in 4000 BCE. And the porcelain was also developed there. So the Chinese culture really took pottery to the extent of where they created very kind of luxurious pieces. They improved on their technology for pottery to great levels, so that Europeans wanted their pottery. That's the reason why sometimes porcelain dishes are called china. When you have a holiday dinner, sometimes your grandma or your mom might be like, can you get out the fine china for me? I'm gonna set up the table with the really fine, nice dishes. So usually those nice dishes are made of porcelain, which is very, very thin, very delicate looking, beautiful, and very hard. So with that, it also chips easily. So you gotta be really careful with porcelain. Okay, look at this incredible piece. This is a piece of Jomon pottery from Japan. Archaeologists found many ceramic works from Japan's Jomon period that dates from 10,000 BCE. So BCE has replaced BC. okay, which is like the period of the birth of Christ, because they wanted to make it non-religious. So we're now, you're using BCE to designate time periods. Let's take a look at this, I say flamboyant piece because it is just so creative and it almost looks playful. The Jomon were people, and they create a certain type of pottery that they're famous for, and it is called Jomon because it means cord pattern, and a cord is like a little rope. So all those little coils look like rope, and they built the pottery by actually pressing rope or cord into the wet clay body. So take a guess here. What could they have used this vessel for? All right, Marquette students, it's your time to shine, because I know he went over Jomon pottery.
To hold liquids.
To hold liquids.
I don't know. It looks like a very aggressive shape. I'm not sure what could be in there.
It does have those kind of very aggressive lines.
To like hold in an empire, it could be like used to hold like the emperor's crown or like something like that.
So maybe it could be used to hold something really culturally important.
Something, yeah.
Okay, I think I like that line of thinking. I feel like maybe it could be used for a ritual like that. So maybe ritualistic purposes. Maybe if we were to push that a little further, Paleolithic man, this could have been a religious vessel or some sort of ritualistic vessel, or it could have been used to hold something that has to do with their culture, because this was the early kind of Stone Age.
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to be wrong.
What? What's wrong with being wrong?
I don't know. I thought it would sound like really messed up if I said that.
No, absolutely not.
All right.
That I would have said absolutely right, because it's so impractical. It's actually a very impractical piece, very delicate at the top. So this is some pieces from Korea and China, side to side. I wanted to make a comparison and a point here. The pottery of Korea, which is actually the country I'm from, was greatly influenced by Chinese pottery. So I wanted you to take a look at these two vessels side by side. This on the left is the Korean maebyung. Byung means jar, basically in Korean. Maebyung, any container or jar. And that's from the 12th century. This piece could have been from a little bit before or maybe around that time, and it is from the Chinese Tang Dynasty. China had many, many dynasties because China is one of the oldest civilizations on earth, and this is a Meiping vase. So maebyung, Meiping sounds very similar, doesn't it? And this is considered a plum vase because what people would do is they used this vase for two functions. They carried liquor in it. It's a pretty elaborate vase to hold liquor, but they would hold liquor in it at first, and later on they would put long stems of plum blossoms. So it became a decorative vase later on. There was a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas among the Korean and Chinese culture because the Chinese actually took over that area of land, thousands of years ago, for a long, long time. So they became a part of China for a long time, and Korea as a country was not even really formed. It was not known as Korea either. So there'll be a lot of similarities in the look and the technology used in their ceramics if you look at Korean and Chinese pottery. So I feel like that's similar with a lot of cultures, because you'll have another culture going into another culture as invaders, or people will start trading with each other. Not necessarily bad things will happen, but sometimes it happens where one culture does take over another culture's land, and they bring their culture and their arts and everything, their dress, everything along with them. So here we have India, and I just chose a couple of pieces of Indian pottery. Pottery in India started out as unglazed earthenware. So earthenware is pottery that is, I don't want to say baked, because baked is not really what happens. When you are in a ceramics class, you will find out with Mr. Marchetti, if you take ceramics, when we bake a piece of ceramic, we are firing the ceramic in a machine or a little space, some sort of thing called a kiln. And that thing can take on many kinds of forms. It could just be like a hole dug out of a hill, and you put your ceramics in there and then put some fire, tinder, and you light a fire. Or you could build an oven out of clay, just even itself made out of clay. Or you could just be the ceramics piled on top of wood and vegetation, dry vegetation, and you just set fire to it. So there's many ways, but earthenware is still fairly soft in terms of fragility. It's not hard like porcelain. And when you say hard, I mean it's not glassy and hard. It's not vitreous because it hasn't been fired to that high a temperature as porcelain. So it's not as strong, that's what I'm saying. But it has its own look, and a lot of cultures use earthenware. That was the first kind of pottery that all people made, earthenware, because they didn't have the technology to fire ceramics at these outrageously high temperatures that stoneware and porcelain, those are two other types of pottery where need to fully make them hard. So what's interesting about Indian pottery is that the actual Hindu traditions, the Hindu religion is the dominant religion in India. Their traditions historically discouraged the use of pottery, I spelled that wrong, for eating off of. So they don't, the actual religion does not like this idea of your eating off of a plate made out of ceramic material. And why? I don't know, but there's a lot of rules in different religions about eating and the way you should eat. And a lot of them came from very practical or common sense ideas like, halal or kosher foods. There's certain foods that shouldn't be eaten or mixed with other foods. And back then, the reason why some of that stuff came about was because of the lack of refrigeration, and some of those foods spoiled very quickly. And that may, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but some of these reasons came from practical reasons so that people didn't get sick. Because earthenware is porous. So it could harbor bacteria because water or whatever you put food in there will actually leach into the pottery because it doesn't have glaze on it, which is like a waterproofing. So because of this, there was a lack of traditions of fine or luxury pottery in contrast to East Asia or Eurasia. Eurasia is like Russia, Turkey. And what I mean by that is I don't want you to misinterpret that. What I mean is they did not pursue the innovation of pottery too far past the use of earthenware because they didn't believe that they believed they shouldn't be eating off of that. But they did find water jugs in Indian culture, in old Indian excavations. They found oil lamps. Terracotta is this beautiful orangey brown clay. That is what's commonly used then and now. So here's some modern pieces over here from the Indian state of Punjab. And India is just like the United States in that it has different regions or states. And each state has like a capital, just like ours is Harrisburg. So, they're organized in that way. And they have distinct pottery, and even within the culture, distinct cultures in those areas. Here is a gentleman making pottery, and he is a part of the Kumar caste community in India and Pakistan. And they are artisans, a group of artisans, and Kumar means potter. So if you are part of the Kumar class, that means your grandfather was a potter, your father was a potter, and you most likely, unless there's a humongous shift in Indian society, that means you're going to be a potter too if you were born into that family. So, in India, there is a caste system, and even among the different crafts and trades, you are given a designation. So he's a part of the Kumar caste. There might be someone who's part of the leather making caste. And each of those castes might also have, unfortunately or fortunately, certain associations, negative or positive. Because if you work with, let's say, leather, some people might look down on that because you have to kill animals and you have to tan leather. And most of the time, if you're a leather worker, you're not Hindi, because in the Hindu religion, the cow is sacred, so you're usually not Hindi. Pots are sometimes hand painted in bright oxides in India. So these are some really colorful pots. You can just note the texture also on them that are kind of scratched in using kind of like a sgraffito technique in clay. Okay, so here are some examples of hand-painted pottery. There's a lot of hand-painted pottery in India, but glazing came about in the 12th century in India, when India was invaded by the Turks and the Persians. Yes, so it was because other cultures came into India. So this is the famous blue glazed pottery in the city of Jaipur, and it is famous for that. So you might have seen some pottery that already looks like this in the United States, in home decoration stores and Marshalls and Home Goods. And if it has this kind of look, it is the famous style of the blue glazed Jaipur pottery. So it's not necessarily just blue, but blue is the predominantly known color. There's some green and there's yellows there as well, but very, very vibrant and colorful. This pottery is not porcelain. It is still low fire earthenware, but it has that little extra waterproof coating of color called glaze. And glaze is glassy, so when you bake glaze on there, when you fire it, it makes your dishes waterproof, so you can safely eat from them or carry water without the water just leaching out of the side of the vessel now. So the last area that I want you to take a look at is Africa and the pottery from Africa. And I feel like in some ways there's a lot of focus in ceramics and even sculpture and just the visual arts on European art, because the European civilization was the dominant civilization for such a long time. And also Eastern art was not even explored that much. But with pottery in China, there was so much innovation that was a humongous influence, and people wanted that as well. So a lot of people who wanted fine pottery did go to China. But there's a lot of pottery made in other countries as well. And I think African art is something that there's not a lot of talk about in general. I feel like there's not a lot of understanding of African art or crafts, just in the United States in general. So let's take a look at that. In Africa, it is women who dominate the production of pottery. They are the actual makers of the vessels. This is a small clip from the Speed Art Museum in Chicago, and they were given a very nice collection of African pottery by a gallery, and this is the gallery owner. He's an expert on African pottery. So let's watch this very short clip. It's only like 4 minutes long. I just want to show you some remarkable pieces in the next slide. So, there was a short video, and I want you to see, and it's like a long video, but I'll only show you clips of it. They are of these 4 tribes, the Igbo, the Yoruba, Gwari, and if I'm saying it wrong, I apologize, the Bini tribe of Nigeria. And of course, you'll see the women creating the pottery. The men help out as far as helping to haul the clay in for the women. Sometimes they help to reconstitute the clay powder, make it into the creamy, consistency that the women need to create their work. And sometimes they help out with the firing. So you'll see that. And this is by these female potters in Nigeria. So I'm just going to show you how quickly they make these very evenly, their technique. So it shows them making the clay. Look at how the craftswoman is pressing with her other hand to make the walls thin. All right, we just finished the YouTube video of the Igbo, Yoruba, Gwari, and Bini tribe women of Africa, and it is mostly women who make pottery on the African continent. And the group that we saw specifically was the Igbo women. That's IGBO. We didn't really have time to look at the others, but you may watch the whole video if you'd like. The pot that you see now on the PowerPoint are made by the Igbo people, the Igbo tribe. This piece was made in Nigeria circa 1960, circa meaning around 1960. And it's a fascinating piece. When I look at this piece, it is definitely made of earthenware. It is terracotta looking, so it's a very orangey kind of brown clay body. And that's what the women were using in the video to create the large cooking pots. There's also a unique textured surface on the upper 2/3, which resemble drapery or fabric treatment. And it's further reinforced by these little marks that were made by a poker or sharp tool that are little wedge-shaped marks. It appears that the craftswoman attached coils of clay, curved coils of clay on the surface of the pottery after they made the initial form, and then they took a tool and kind of pierced it on either side of the coil, on the top and the bottom of the coil, to further make it appear as if the pot is wearing a fiber-based kind of fabric, like a textural fabric. Everything is still terracotta clay, so that's just kind of an illusion they're creating. I feel like that's very, very clever detail, but it's also very textural. So going back to this assignment, I want you to not forget about the texture component. The second piece on the right that you see is by the Kurumba people. And the Kurumba people are of Burkina Faso. They have a similar treatment in that they're using coils. So they're rolling out their coils and their craftswomen are attaching the coils of clay to the surface. But it's a different look. There's no longer this kind of pierced texture all over. However, there is some sort of an anthropomorphic imagery in this piece. So the Kurumba people, they hold the antelope in their area very, very sacred. So if you look very closely, you'll see two sets of little eyes, and you'll see what looks like three lines that look almost like eyebrows. And they look very, very similar to the horns on the antelope. Their priests wear a antelope horn headdress during important ceremonies. What makes me think this is also a reference to their sacred antelope is the little half moon-shaped shapes near the foot of the pottery, which resemble the hoofs of the antelope. So it's a very, very flamboyant piece. It's a fun piece, but it also expresses their values, what they hold dear to them and sacred to them. So you'll see similarities as well as differences between the styles of African pottery from one state to the other. Just like in many different regions of other countries, there are distinctive styles. The next slide is very different in that it is not a vessel. It has never been used as a vessel. It is a royal woman's head sculpture from Lagos, Nigeria. It was made in the 12th and 15th centuries. And it is made out of terracotta clay. So the reason I included this piece was because of its remarkable texture all over the surface of the head as well as the face. The face has those lines not just for decoration, but it is actually a representation of the facial scarifications of these people who this head represents a royal member of these people. So this is a royal woman's head. There is a beautiful basket-shaped hairstyle on her head, and that also is expressed by very, very three-dimensional texture. This is a sculpture. There was a body. They have found parts of limbs and bodies that belong to these sculptures. So it was not just a portrait bust. A portrait bust is a kind of three-dimensional sculptural portrait, usually from the waist up. But they did find that some of these were heads belong to full figures, life size as well as smaller than life size. So points to ponder. The next slide shows points to ponder, things to think about. That's what it means. What are the similarities and differences between the two sculptures of the women's heads? The one on the left is another beautiful and highly realistic example of a royal woman's head from Lagos, Nigeria. And that's made in the same time period as the previous head we just talked about, 12th to 15th century. And then on the right, there is a much older piece from 80 CE, and this is a bust of a Roman woman from Rome, Italy. So what are some of the similarities and differences between the two women's heads, the two sculptures of the women's heads? Okay, so we'll talk about that in our class, and we did. Okay, some of the points were they were both very realistic depictions of women. Some people had noted that. They were very specific people. They were not just generic beauties of their time. They both have elaborate hairstyles that was taken with great care to represent. And they were very specific hairstyles. I have seen this hairstyle on the Roman women, on many other sculpture busts of women from that time, representing women from the time in Rome, Italy. So it was definitely, most definitely, a real hairstyle. And of course, we saw the basket-shaped, elaborate hairstyle on the previous terracotta head from Nigeria. So it was a style, a trend that was very popular. What are the differences now? The differences is we talked about material. So they were each made in the material that was plentiful in the region. So there was terracotta clay that was found in the region to make the pottery head in Nigeria. And when I think of Italy as the marble capital of the world. So, people made sculptures, busts in marble, not because it was prestigious, but out of marble because it was plentiful. There's plenty of marble in regions of Italy. So they made their art with the materials that were indigenous to the area. So what are other similarities? They are both women of very high standing and importance, and that's why somebody took so much painstaking effort to depict the very details on each of the women's faces. Okay, so some of the differences and similarities. A second points to ponder slide. Without the captions, if you weren't able to read, or there was no words down below the pictures, without the captions, can you distinguish the pottery of the first culture from the pottery of the second culture? So let's take a look at this slide. What are the differences and similarities? Can you distinguish? Well, they're both shards because, of course, they were found in caves where time had damaged the pieces. Or maybe they were damaged and they were just thrown away in some portion of the cave. They were just artifacts from a civilization, and they just perhaps were broken and they were thrown away. We don't know because we weren't there. But what are some similarities? Well, some of the things that can, what are the similarities is they both have texture. The artists bothered to create pattern and texture. The pieces on the right have more distinct texture. So maybe that would distinguish that from the pottery of the culture on the left side, where the piece looks darker in the picture. So we looked at the distinctive marks, and we also discussed that how those marks definitely looked fresher. The ones on the left looked a little bit more worn. That could possibly distinguish one from the other as being a newer culture or created at a more recent time. But both are prehistoric. They both are very, very old. And it also depends on how well preserved that cave might have been, how sheltered from the elements. So sometimes things get preserved if there is other materials around it that protects those artifacts. What can you distinguish the first culture from the pottery of the second? We could, because the one looks older and the one looks newer. The markings on the right side looks more distinctive, but there are similarities too, in that they both do have markings. The artisans bothered to put patterning on both, but the one on the right looks like the patterning is a lot more detailed. So if you look on the left, it is that piece of the oldest piece or shard of pottery fragment from 20,000 years ago in Xianrendong in China. The pieces on the right are from Sierra Leone in West Africa, from the excavations of another cave area called the Kamabai rock shelter. The one on the right also includes a more advanced form where the pottery was formed into a hollow kind of handle or a little pipe kind of shape. So if you look on the lower left of the second slide, there's a little bit more advanced hand building of the clay. Okay, so the last slide is one of student work in an art class. It's a textured coil pot. This particular one does not look like it was modeled after any type of cultural piece, but I would highly recommend that you base your form off of a historical cultural piece of pottery that you explored in your notes, just so that it doesn't look kind of generic in nature like this particular piece. What I like about it is that there is stamping, there is coiling, there's also, it looks like the person somehow rolled the coil in a lace or a fabric and then use the coil to weave it in with other smooth coils to make the textured braid and to make the coils that have an interesting fibrous or fabric texture. So you definitely want to create texture in some way, either by stamping, rolling it in some sort of a scrap fabric, or using any kind of a tool around your home by piercing and stamping with that tool. Something that is very common in household. It could be a pencil, it could be a fork, it could be the end of a spoon, it could be anything really. So explore texture and enhance your cultural pottery piece in that way. Okay, class, so let's go and start our very own textured pot. Bye-bye.
I assume this is hot out.
No. No.
And flash a gang sign.
No.